Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Man,
I hear you.
So,
what are you doing? I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Thanks, everyone, for being here. My name is Casey Soloff. I am a real estate agent with Compass. Let me fire this up real quick. Does everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Hoping everybody's paying attention. Yeah, my name is Casey Soloff. I'm a salesperson with the Gladen Rohrer team at Compass. I'll be your host for the evening. So I know it's a school night, so I'll promise I'll try and keep everything quick and move forward fast. And at the end, we can do a Q&A with the panel, try to answer all of your questions about buying a home here in New York City. So let's start by introducing my partners for the evening. First up, in this business, I get a chance to work with quite a few lenders, but few of them what I describe as a whiz with numbers. That's why he's always my first call when it comes to mortgages or financing or pre-approval or anything with a dollar sign in front of it. Danny, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you, Casey?
Good. Are you ready to talk about interest rates, which is anything anybody wants to talk about these days?
I really haven't spoke about it much lately. It's something
Is that
going
right?
on.
That's all I hear about. All I hear about is
Yeah, it is the hot topic. It is the number one headline these days. Well, not number one, but it's number one financial. One of the
coming
top
close.
financial headlines.
Right.
Yeah.
Next up.
But it's good.
Next up, when it comes to home buying, a great lawyer can make or break a deal depending on their expertise and their dedication, which is why I asked a great lawyer to be a part of our discussion this evening. We have Jacqueline Newmark. She's a partner at the law firm of Wexler and Kaufman, and she is rarely seen away from a closing table, but she's here tonight. So hi, Jackie. How are you? You're on mute.
Am I good now?
There you go. There you go.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I feel like
Okay.
that's gonna happen quite
Thanks
often.
for having me and nice to meet everybody.
Yeah. Next up, he's the man who puts the Gladen in the Gladen Rohrer team. He's a longtime resident of Brooklyn. He's helped to sell and buy properties all over the city. He also acts, he plays guitar, he can ride a skateboard, which is way more than I can say. So everyone, please welcome Calvin Gladen. Calvin, how are you?
Good. It's nice
Good,
to be
good.
here. Thanks for setting this up, Casey.
No problem.
Right
And finally, he started selling real estate in the city over 20 years ago, and he just never stopped. He's even got his own townhouse right in Park Slope. He's one of the most knowledgeable agents I've ever met in the business, so I'm glad to be on his team. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Michael Rohrer. Michael, how are you? He's on mute also.
There we go. Hi. I'm great. Hello from the big island of Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
I'm on vacation, but I'm thrilled to be joining you here today.
Great. Let me fire up
So
this.
jealous.
Okay. Yeah. So let's get underway. So I just want to say a very quick thing about Compass. After only 10 years, I'm sure you've heard our name, but Compass has become the #1 independent broker in the United States. We are the top brokerage in the city of New York when it comes to listing count. And in 2020 alone, we sold over $1.26 billion in real estate. And again, this is only after a decade. We are soaring right now as a company. And it's because our leadership, our principles, our technology is not only attracting agents, but also sellers in droves from the more traditional brokerages in New York City. Because of our technology, we're able to do our job much more quickly and efficiently than anyone else. And it makes things not just easier for us, but it truly makes us better agents for you, our clients. So I promised a quick and simple evening, so let's get it started. Here's what I plan to cover. First, I want to discuss really the most important question, the question I'm sure you've all been asking yourselves. Does it make sense for me to buy? Next, I want to talk about the different kinds of properties that you find in New York City, basically the difference between condos and houses on one hand and co-ops on the other. Finally, I want to talk about what the buying process will look like from start to finish. So let's start with the first and most important. Does it make sense for you to buy? Not for anyone, but for you in particular to buy. So if you want to live in New York City, as far as I'm aware, you have to do one of two things. You have to either rent or you have to own. Now, assuming that you're all online at 7:30 on a Tuesday to tune into a first-time buyer seminar, I'm guessing you've not yet bought and are currently renting. Now, when you get that rent confirmation email every month, or you see that line on your bank statement that lets you know that your money's been taken out, I'm sure it's occurred to you, like it's occurred to everyone, to ask yourself, could I be paying at or around the same amount of money every month and be earning equity in my home by buying instead of renting? So the question you should be asking yourself isn't really whether or not you can buy. The question should be whether or not it makes sense for you to buy. Now, as tenants, I'm sure you know that renting has its advantages. The biggest one being that you can leave when you want to. You can try different neighborhoods. You can move to Dumbo because of the views. And after you realize that the bar and restaurant scene kind of sucks, you can kind of just pick up and move to Park Slope or Prospect Heights. Or if you move into a 1-bedroom and after a year, you're about to start a family, you can just leave for a 3-bed. There's no muss, no fuss. You just leave as soon as your lease expires. Another plus is that you can save up money to buy. If you leave this seminar and you're convinced that buying does make sense for you, but you don't quite have the funds yet to put down the kind of money that you need for the home that you want, you can rent a place, and that gives you the time to do that. And of course, if anything breaks or goes wrong, the standard New York rental has what's called a triple net lease, which means if anything breaks, the refrigerator stops working, or you don't have heat all of a sudden, assuming you weren't the one that broke it, the landlord is required to fix it. So there's certainly a freedom to renting that you don't have when you own. However, there are some glaring downsides that make it ultimately more beneficial, in my opinion, to own a home. For one, your rent could and likely will go up every time you renew your lease. That can be if you're in a rent stabilized apartment, and it can be only raised by 1% or 2% every renewal, or it can be if you live in a free market rental and the landlord can raise it by whatever they like. There's a good chance you're going to be paying more and more and more the longer you live there. And this is particularly relevant these days, right? I know a lot of renters that found some incredible deals during the height of the pandemic, and now some of those leases are up for renewal, and those same renters find themselves in the middle of the hottest rental market I've ever seen, and their landlords decide, and they're not wrong, that they can get an extra $500 a month from these other tenants who are out there scrambling to find an apartment. So if you want to stay, you're going to need to match that. And I've heard people tell me, I have a close friend in particular, that may have to move because their landlord decided their rent by as much as $1,000 a month. This is happening, and it's legal, and it's just something you have to deal with when you're a tenant and you live in a home that somebody else owns. Another con of renting, of course, is when you leave with nothing. You have earned no equity in your apartment, and all of the money you spent on rent now belongs to someone else. End of story. So I sat down and thought about it. I've lived in Brooklyn going on 19 years now, 6 different apartments in that time. And when I did the math, how much do you think I've given away in rent? Now, normally when I'm in person, people actually call out answers to this, and they're almost always wrong. There has literally been only one person that ever got it right, and believe it or not, it was Danny. So Danny, are you up for another guess as to how much I've given away on rent after 19 years? Last time we did this, I think it had been 16 years, and you hit the nail on the head.
I'm going to say 19 years. You are just shy of $800,000.
Big, no, totally off. After 19 years, I've spent about $4,000, I mean, give or take, $421,000, $50. So that means over 19 years, I've spent over $420,000 to live in New York City. And how much equity have I earned in that time? Not a dime. That $421,050 now belongs to someone else. It's never to be seen again by me or my wife or my son, who has a very expensive Cheerio habit. It is gone forever. So let's do a little math, and I've erred on the side of higher rents because that's the kind of market we're in right now. But let's say you're paying $3,500 for a 1-bedroom apartment right now, somewhere in Brooklyn. What could you get if you had the money to convert that? And I say convert, I don't say spend, because you're not giving that money away when you buy. I know it's hard to write a check for literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you're not giving that money away to anyone. You're just converting it. You're giving that money literally to yourself in a different form. Excuse me. But what could you get if you had the money to convert to a down payment on a home in Brooklyn? Well, for $3,500 a month, you could be making payments on a mortgage of about $750,000, which, assuming you've put $20,000 down, that puts you in the market for properties around $930,000. Right now, at this moment, 925 Union Street, Union 3C is a beautiful 1-bed, 1-bath in Park Slope, only asking $625,000. There's a beautiful 1-bed in Clinton Hill, which is an incredible neighborhood, $689,000. In Williamsburg, 184 Kent Avenue, Unit A208. It's a really nice 1-bed, 1-bath, $895,000. So you see where I'm going with this. Let's step it up a little bit. Say that you're paying $5,000 a month for a 1 or 2-bedroom apartment. Okay, for $5,000 a month, you could be paying a mortgage of about $1 million, just over $1 million. And assuming you've put 20% down, that means you're looking at properties in the $1.3 million range. Right now in Gowanus, there's a beautiful 2-bed, 2-bath for 1.25. There is 346 Bond Street in Carroll Gardens, a 1-bed, 1-bath for 1.15 million. And 111 Hicks, Unit 8N in Brooklyn Heights, which is an incredible neighborhood, as everyone knows. There's a 2-bed, 2-bath for 1.25. So let's go crazy now and say you're saying you're paying $6,500 a month for a much nicer apartment than I'm paying, than I'm renting. A 2-bedroom, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. But every month you're giving away $6,500 in rent. So for $6,500, you could be paying off a mortgage of about a little more than $1.3 million, which means, assuming you've put 20% down, you're looking at properties in the range of 1.7 million. There is a beautiful 3-bed, 2-bath in Park Slope for 1.65 right now on the market. I don't even think it's been a week listed. 230 Ashland Place, 26C, a 2-bed, 2-bath for 1.4. And you know what? Let's give some love to Bay Ridge, because I love Bay Ridge. I've done some deals out there. You could buy your own house out. The further out you go, the more likely that is. You don't have to buy a $3 million, $4 million townhouse in the middle of Park Slope. You could be buying a really nice house at 74th Street in Bay Ridge, 4-bed, 2-bath for not even $1.5 million. So let's say you're convinced. Let's say at the very least you're intrigued. Maybe there's something to this buying thing. The first box you want to be checking off of your mental list, if you could see yourself owning a house, is whether or not you see yourself there for 5 to 7 years, because that's kind of, as a rule of thumb, that's the amount of time it takes to make it worth the effort to move, to pay closing costs, to pay the mortgage, the first few years of your mortgage. Now, the answer to that question, whether or not you can see yourself here for 4 to 5 years, is completely up to you. That's a very, very personal question. Now, if you just got married and you plan to have children, does it make sense to buy a studio in a co-op building? Probably not. Or maybe you've been living in the city for 15 years and you get kind of a hankering for blue skies and mountains and you need more space, and you keep hearing the word Colorado in your sleep, and maybe it's not the right time to be buying in New York. Maybe you need to wait. But if you look down the road of your life and in 5 years, you don't see yourself going anywhere, or at least not seeing the need to sell your apartment, then that's a good sign that you're ready to stop renting and start owning. Okay, so you've looked into your crystal ball. It's 2028. There's peace on earth and you still love living here in New York. The next question you want to ask yourself is, do I have the initial investment saved up to get the kind of place that I want? Now, some people are under the impression that all they need is 20% down and they're good to go. But it's totally not the case. You also need to factor in closing costs, which in general, we ballpark around 3% for a co-op or 5% for a condo of the total sale price. And they're rarely that much, but as a rule of thumb, again, that's generally what we ballpark. And then we'll get to that later. But also, if you're applying to a co-op, and this is very important, co-op boards will want to see that not only can you cover the down payment, but that you've got what's called post-close liquidity. And each co-op requires something different, but in general, an average co-op in an average Brooklyn neighborhood will want to see that after you've paid 20% down and you've paid your closing costs, you have at least enough left over in liquid assets. And again, that doesn't include retirement, liquid assets, to pay your mortgage and your monthly maintenance costs for at least a year, usually more. Again, it depends on the co-op board, but think about that. It's not just the 20% down payment, and it's not just the closing costs and you're scot-free. Some of these places won't even consider you unless they can see that you can cover your mortgage and your maintenance for at least a year, usually more than that. So if God forbid there's a recession or you lose your job or whatever it is, they want to make sure that you've got enough money in liquid assets to stick it out for a year or so. Okay, so you're here for the foreseeable future. You have the resources to buy the kind of apartment you want in a neighborhood you love. The last question you should ask yourself, is this a good time to buy? The answer to this question right now is yes, and that's for a couple reasons. The biggest of those reasons, and Danny, get ready because I'm going to flip it over to you, is that money is still very cheap these days. And from what I hear, it's really not going to get any cheaper. It's already something like, I think, 1% higher than what it was last year. And that's for a variety of reasons that I think you can speak to a lot better than I do. But Danny, what are you seeing as far as what average rates are these days, where they were, where you see them going?
All right. So right now where we stand, the average interest rate is in the ballpark of around 3.5% on a 30-year fix, which is the most conventional and conservative loan product. And Casey, you just hit it on the head. It is actually up nearly a full percent from about a year ago, when in the peak of the pandemic, the rates crashed to an all-time low of 2.5%. And a question that I always get asked is, well, when will it go back down, or will it go back down? And in my personal opinion, I don't think that, and I actually hope we never see those rates again, because I think it would have to take a pretty alarming global event, again, to cause rates to fall that low. Before the pandemic started, the rates were already historically low, and they were exactly where they are now, at right around 3.5%. So the pandemic caused the rates to crash to another historic low, but now the Fed has indicated that for the foreseeable future, if not permanently, the rates are going to be going up, which makes now a definitely good time to borrow money at a lower level than next year or the year after.
Great. I know when I went to real estate school, we had some very, very old-time real estate agents who were like, it was incredible back then. I was apologizing to people because I couldn't get them 11%. And now, I mean, it's just incredible how low things have gone from what I understand. So like I said, now, you know, Danny confirmed, now is an incredible time to be borrowing money if you want to buy. Second reason it's a great time to buy, you may have heard it, and it's true, is that inventory is down, and it's down across the country, but it's predicted to be down for the foreseeable future. And New York real estate doesn't really dive. There's not going to be some surge of inventory and things are just going to suddenly dip. They may dip here and there by a couple of percentages, but in general, New York real estate just gets more and more valuable. It's historically one of the best investments you can make, no matter when you make it. So if you do have the money to put down, the money to cover the closing costs, the money for post-close liquidity if you're buying a co-op, and most importantly, if it makes sense for your life plans, which I can't stress that enough, that is the most important thing, there's really not going to be a better time to buy than right now. So let's take a breath and get ready to talk about what kind of properties you can buy here in New York City. So forgive me if you know this already, but this is a seminar for first-time home buyers. So I'm going to get real basic here and break down what kind of places you can find here in New York. So if you're buying in New York, you're either buying a co-op, which is now something like 65% of apartments in the city. It used to be a lot more. You're buying a condo, or you're buying a house or a townhouse, same kind of thing. Some differences in those might be very obvious, but others might need some explanation. So here we go. Now, the main difference between the two, and some of you might know this because this is really home buying 101, is that when you buy a condo or a house of some kind, you're buying real estate. It's very simple. It's the same as what you would if you were buying 10 acres in the middle of Connecticut. You own real property with a title and a deed. Now, in a co-op, the situation is very different. The real estate, which in this case is the apartment building, is owned by a corporation. So the corporation holds the deed. And when you buy into a co-op, you're not buying real estate, you're buying shares in that corporation. You become a partial owner of the corporation, just like you would buy shares of Amazon or Apple. And your shares entitle you to live in a certain apartment in that building. Another difference between condos and co-ops, and I'm lumping houses into the condo section because, like I said, one is real estate and one is shares. Another difference is the amount you pay every month. In a condo or a townhouse, since it's real estate, you pay real estate taxes every month. Also in a condo, since you're in a building with other people, you pay what's called common charges, which is a monthly payment to the condo board to maintain the building, pay the super or the gardener, or the cleaning service, or to keep the roof deck nice, or whatever it is that you all enjoy together. Obviously, you don't have common charges when you own a house by yourself. You have other expenses, but that's different. In a co-op, on the other hand, since the corporation owns the real estate, it's the corporation paying the real estate taxes, and you contribute a monthly portion of those taxes to the corporation based on the number of shares that you own. And that gets combined with common charges into something called maintenance. It sounds the same, and in essence, it kind of is the same, but you actually end up paying a little less when you own a co-op, since the corporation pays corporate taxes. You also get a percentage of the maintenance that you can write off, just like you write off real estate taxes. That, of course, differs from building to building. Co-ops and condos also have different closing costs. We mentioned this earlier. Since condos are real property, you end up paying for a title search to make sure the person who claims to own it really does own it. You pay for title insurance in case one day someone comes out of the woodwork and can prove that they actually own it and the seller you bought it from really has no right to sell it in the first place. It never really happens. I've never seen it happen, but it is required. And for a mortgage recording fee, which is required by the state. Now, in a co-op, there's of course no question who owns the property. The corporation owns the property. So it's much easier to prove ownership. You do pay for other things like a lien search to make sure no one has a lien against those shares. But that's much, much cheaper. Actually, now I'm going to flip it over to you, Jackie, because I've taken it easy on you. Can you talk a little bit about some of the issues you've seen come across at closing or even after closing, where some of these line items like title search, insurance, and all that have actually proven to be of the essence in a home search?
Yeah. So, with real property, as you were saying, you're purchasing title insurance. And as you said, it protects you in the event somebody, which is unlikely, says that they own the property. But when it does occur is if you're purchasing from an estate and the estate wasn't properly probated, there could be heirs out there or, half siblings or children who come out and say, wait, I was part of this will. I should have, received a certain percentage, and they try to claim a percentage of ownership. So the title insurance protects you from that. It also protects you from any unrecorded mortgages or liens. Not likely, but in my 25 years and plus, I have seen where a seller 2 weeks before closing will go out and take a home equity, and it's not recorded yet because it takes forever in New York to record something. And if they draw down on that line and then it's not recorded, nobody knows about it, so they don't have to pay it off. They stop paying, and then all of a sudden the lender is starting a foreclosure, and so the new buyer would be protected, and they would be their lawsuit would be defended by the title company. As far as a co-op, and again, as you briefly said, because it's not real property and we're pretty sure who owns the property, we just do a lien search. However, if you're buying a co-op, the same as with real property from an estate, we do recommend purchasing what's called an Eagle 9 policy, which is title insurance for a co-op. So they do the same type of thorough search to make sure that there's no unrecorded liens that even the corporation isn't aware of. Some other small items that come up that always seem to be the last minute panic at a co-op is the seller, there's a lien showing from a prior owner that just never was recorded. And we all know that it was paid off because they wouldn't be allowed to purchase, but we're chasing lenders that don't even exist anymore to get terminations. But all of these, a lot of people sort of question and get a little aggravated about the title fees. But I can say, they're important because when you need them, you're happy you paid the $4,000 or whatever it is to protect your interest in your most important asset.
Yeah, I can imagine. That sounds wild. Are there any total horror stories that stick out in your mind?
So, yeah, and recently, not too long ago, it was a sponsor deal. And most people, think, why do I even need title insurance? The sponsor must have done their thorough search. Well, at the closing table, the person signing on behalf of the sponsor didn't have the authority. They had fake documentation because everyone requires who has the right to sign off on the deed. And 4 months later, some of the owner, the LLC members for the sponsor were shocked that all the units were sold because the person signing had no authority.
Oh my God.
So yeah, it's important. And, the same things with, stepchildren who weren't aware that a property was sold. And you need to really make sure that you've got the attorney representing you who knows how to read a title search to make sure everything's cleared. And more importantly, the title company that your attorney chooses is very well versed in these complicated matters.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now we understand.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about the differences in financing these different apartments. So when you buy a condo, there's no entity such as a co-op board telling you how much you have to put down. That's really between you and the seller and the bank. So co-ops, on the other hand, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, but most co-ops will almost always require at least 20% down, because it's in their interest that all shareholders are in a really solid financial position. So they kind of feel that if you can't even put 20% down, maybe you're not the right kind of person to be buying their corporation. This, of course, has exceptions. You definitely hear about certain places that will accept less than 20%. But in general, a co-op will want at least 20% down and won't consider you otherwise, which is why when a buyer tells us in general that they don't have the 20% down, it's almost always we're looking for condos instead of co-ops because the exception is so rare. The same goes for your debt to income ratio. You can think of this as the amount of your monthly income that is spoken for each and every month after you closed on your apartment. That means your mortgage payments are going to be due, obviously. That's a regular debt that you're going to have to pay. That means your common charges and taxes or your maintenance payment, depending on whether you're in a condo or a co-op. But that also means any regular debt, such as auto loans or student loans or any kind of large significant credit card debt. It doesn't mean utilities. It doesn't mean, like, if you're like me, you pay off a credit card balance at the end of every month. It means any kind of regular significant debt, including your mortgage and your maintenance or common charges and taxes. For a condo, the requirement is really set by the lender. And for a conventional loan, your DTI, and Danny, keep me honest here, can be as high as 45%. But for a co-op, they want to know that nearly half of your paycheck isn't already spoken for every month. Because like I said, they're invested in having very secure, financially secure residents. So a co-op will require usually a maximum DTI of about 25, no more than 30%. And again, that changes from place to place. It's certainly more lax in Brooklyn than it is in Manhattan. And these financial requirements, they seem kind of like a stiff number. They seem kind of like a bummer. But if you remember in 2008, when the entire country was crashing in a housing crisis, the reason New York City wasn't quite as affected as the rest of the nation was, is because there are so many co-ops here. Like I said, I think now it's 65% of apartments in the city are co-ops, but it used to be a lot more. And they screen their owners and require them to be much more financially secure before they allow them to buy. Next, a big difference between condos and co-ops is the application process. And again, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, maybe heard some horror stories. But for a condo, it's simple. There's only one reason that a condo board can deny you, and that's if they want to buy the apartment themselves. Now, why would a condo board want to buy an apartment in their own building for themselves? It's almost always to install some kind of live-in super or some sort of employee to live on the premises. That's why if an apartment comes due, the co-op board has the opportunity to buy it for themselves. But in most cases, they've already decided that the super often lives off-site or has an apartment already, and it just doesn't happen. When it comes to a co-op board, on the other hand, there's the dreaded interview, and they can reject you for any reason they want to. They can think you're not a good personality fit for the building. They can decide they don't like your dog. And the worst part of all of it is they don't have to tell you why they rejected you. And it sounds scary and it sounds riskier, and it's certainly riskier than buying a condo, but most co-op boards are pretty simple. If you have the right requirements, you have the right liquid assets, and you're friendly at your interview, you are usually good to go. Finally, a big difference between condos and co-ops is autonomy. This is where a condo wins big. That's your property. You can do what you want with it. You can alter it. You can sublease it. You can move to Colorado and keep it. I keep mentioning Colorado. Maybe that's a Freudian slip. You can keep it as an investment property for the rest of your life. With a co-op board, there's a set of house rules that you agree to abide by when you live there. And there's almost always a limit to subleasing because co-ops want primary residents. They want people who live there, who own there. They don't want investors. For example, a common rule that you see all the time is that once you've lived in a co-op for 2 years full-time, then they'll allow you to sublease for 2 or maybe 3 years at the most, after which time you'll be required to return and live again as a full-time resident. It is not like a condo. Some people rent condos. I have a lot of friends who are in rentals that they're just renting from condo owners, and that's great. You can't do that as a rule of thumb in a co-op. There are, of course, exceptions, just like there are exceptions to the 20% rule. Some co-op boards will allow you to sublease indefinitely. It's definitely out there. But in general, they want full-time residents, and if they allow subletting, it's usually for 2 or 3 years at the very most, after which you'll be required to return or you'll be required to sell. Again, you also, not again, but in addition, you have to have any kind of renovations or alterations approved by the co-op board. You can't just throw a drywall, separation in between a large 1-bedroom and turn it into a 2-bedroom. You can do that with a condo. With a co-op, you need to have every kind of alteration approved by the co-op board. So that begs the question, which is better, a condo or a co-op? And the answer really is, it depends on your life and what you're looking for. If you find a condo that costs a little more, but it's right in the neighborhood you love, or you see yourself moving in a couple of years and you still want to own it as an investment, then a condo is right for you. And if you find a great co-op and the co-op board has great financials and you're not allowed to sublet, but you plan on living there anyway for 5 to 7 years without any interruption, then a co-op is a great option. It really depends on you and what your life looks like. Okay, I'm gonna take a drink. Give me 1 second. By the way, when we're all done, I would love to have a Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, and I'm sure they're percolating, we have, I had 16 people here. Throw them in the chat and I'll definitely review them at the end and we'll all get to them. So feel free to start entering that. So let's assume now that after hearing this, it makes sense for you to buy, you understand what you want, you know what you're getting into. Let's talk about what the buying process actually looks like. So step 1 is, of course, to find yourself an agent. Now, I'm not sure where you're going to find one of those because they're really hard to come by, but oh, there's one right there. I see. I'm an agent and I would love to work with you, which is why we're doing this. But having an agent on your side is actually a tremendous help. And let me explain why. Because yes, we can help you with your search, but I'm sure you're spending most of your time at work searching Street Easy or Zillow anyway. You saw that SNL skit, it was pretty incredible. So what we do is a lot more than that. For example, we often get listings before they're even seen by the public. We are a network. We do talk to people in our business. We hear about certain things that are coming to market. And if they, we have a buyer and they have a seller and they just want to get it done, then that's, one opportunity for an agent to really, really come in strong. Real estate moves really fast in New York, and just having those few lead days, on finding an apartment that might be going to market and you just see it and you decide you want it, that can be actually a huge help. Another thing we do is we guide you through the process, which is what I'm talking about right now, which can definitely be overwhelming and complicated. This is often the biggest purchase of somebody's life, so it is a little scary. And since this is what we do day in, day out, this is something that we help you with as well. We negotiate for you when it's time to make an offer. We've been through this, again, this is our day to day. We deal with negotiations all the time. Negotiation can be, we can be honest, it's a little awkward to throw, money around and decide you want to lowball somebody and you're not sure if that's going to offend them, blah, 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 blah. We see that all the time, and we know what what's going to offend somebody, what's going to be a ridiculous offer, and what's going to be, a sensible, reasonable offer to get you, a better price on an apartment. So that's something that we help you with as well. We're there for emotional support. This is, as I said, sometimes the biggest purchase of someone's life. It only makes sense that it would be pretty stressful. So we're there. We see this all the time. People get cold feet almost every time. We're there to kind of keep your eye on the big picture and, that remind you that this is a smart investment for your future and that you wanted it. Another thing we can do is connect you with the right people. Like I mentioned in the beginning, Compass is a heavyweight in the New York real estate market. The people we work with, the lawyers and the lenders and the contractors, they want to be on our good side. They want to make sure our clients are happy, because that could mean recommendations to our colleagues, and it could be going back to them for, more and more. So if they screw up, or if they, treat our clients poorly, they know that their reputation within our brokerage, or certainly with us, has been tarnished, and that could mean a lot of business potentially lost. And here's the best part out of all of it. When you have an agent and you're buying, it costs you absolutely nothing. It doesn't cost you $1. The broker fees on a sale are paid entirely by the seller. They're split between the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. You don't pay anything to the broker. So when you think about it, it's really a no-brainer. There's absolutely no reason not to have an expert and an ally and somebody who does this every day on your side during the biggest purchase of your life. So let's say you and I talk, we like each other, you decide that I'm the right agent to help you out. The very first thing I'm going to ask you is, have you found a lender to pre-approve you, and why? Well, there's a few reasons. For one, it shows you've got some skin in the game. I'm sure you can imagine that a lot of people who are on Zillow day in, day out, Street Easy day in, day out, they just want to window shop because it's fun to visit properties, and it is fun to visit properties. I love it. It's one of the reasons I got into this job. But some of these folks have no serious interest in buying, and that's totally fine. But if you want an agent to spend their time planning, calling, searching, then it's important to know that you've taken at least 15 minutes to speak to a lender and find out what you can actually afford. And for that same reason, some sellers agents, people who are listing on behalf of a seller, will ask to see a buyer's pre-approval letter before they even allow them to visit the property, especially during COVID, and especially with higher priced properties. They don't want to just open the doors to everybody who wants to come see a $5 million townhouse. They want to know that the people who have seen it have taken that bare minimum step of talking to a lender and finding out that what they can afford. But most importantly, assuming you're serious about buying, unless you're paying all cash, in which case you don't need pre-approval, there's not a single seller in this city that will accept an offer on a property without a pre-approval letter. You can say, I'll pay you $1 million for an apartment, but the seller would be an idiot to accept that offer and take their apartment off the market and stop showing it to everyone else without knowing for a fact that you can actually afford to pay them $1 million. So pre-approval letters are the bare minimum when it comes to making even the first offer on an apartment. A lender will vet you, he'll look into your finances, he'll tell you what you've been approved to purchase, but most importantly, connecting with a lender means you connected with yet another expert who can advise you on one of the biggest purchases of your life. So for the love of God, stay away from Rocket, stay away from Quicken. Those people are in boiler rooms in the middle of nowhere. They don't understand the New York market. It's incredibly important to connect with somebody who is familiar with New York. We are our own little bubble. We have our own set of issues. You want to find someone someone who picks up the phone when you call them, someone like Danny, who I deal with all the time. So Danny, can you talk to us about what pre-approval looks like, how long it takes, the difference between pre-approval and pre-qualification? People don't necessarily know what that means. And also a big question I often hear is whether or not pre-approval will affect credit scores. Can you talk about that as well?
Absolutely. So the main difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval is that a pre-qualification actually means nothing, and a pre-approval is when the lender actually goes through a buyer's finances. So the goal of a pre-approval is to see how much a buyer can ultimately afford and qualify for. So how do we find this out? We take a look at three main things from a buyer to see how much they can qualify for. And those three things I like to call the CIA: credit, income, and assets. These are the three main pillars that a bank is looking for when they are pre-approving somebody to see how much of a loan they can afford. We're looking into what kind of credit history and credit score the buyer has, what kind of income a buyer has, whether they have a salary or whether they own their own business, whether they get a lot of commission. We're looking into all different income types and assets. We're looking to see how much money is in the bank. Is money potentially coming from family? Is money coming in the form of a bonus down the road? We want to put all three together because all three one cannot stand without the other. And the goal, again, is to see how much we can afford and how much we can qualify for. So how it starts is just a conversation, 15, 20 minutes to get an overall view on those numbers. But if we just stopped there and we just had a phone call, that would be the pre-qualification, where we don't actually run the credit, we just talk about it. We don't actually prove how much income you have, you just tell me how much income you have, and we don't actually look at how much money you have in the bank, it's all just verbal. Now, let's put ourselves in the seats of the seller. If somebody says, hey, I spoke to a lender and I told them how much money I make, and I told them how much money I have in the bank, and they gave me this letter of approval. Would a seller really feel comfortable with that, knowing that the lender didn't actually verify anything? They would want to see that the lender did more work than that. So the difference between pre-qualification and pre-approval is that a pre-approval actually proves all those things. When we're looking at income, we collect pay stubs and W-2s and possibly even tax returns to see, okay, this is how much money you make. We look at bank statements to see how much money is available in the bank. And then we do run a credit report to verify what kind of credit scores and credit history the buyer has. And, you know, Casey, you hit it perfectly. One out of three, the pushback that we get is usually in regards to the credit, because the number one myth out there is that having your credit pulled will hurt your credit scores. And I say that's a myth because there is some truth to it, but it is not applicable when it comes to mortgages. So when you have a hard inquiry on your credit, it actually matters where the hard inquiry is coming from to the credit algorithms to see if it actually hurts your scores or not. Now, mortgages are considered good debt as opposed to a credit card or a personal loan. Those can be considered bad debt. So when a mortgage bank runs somebody's credit, the credit algorithms view that as a good hit and they don't hurt them for it. But when you have your local bank where you're getting a new credit card and they run your credit, that actually does hurt your scores. So that's why there is some truth to it, but it's a common misconception because from the mortgage side of things, there's actually no adverse impact on the credit scores. So it's very important to do that up front so that everyone knows, okay, the credit scores look good, there's no downside, there's no cost involved, and now you switch this from a pre-qualification to a pre-approval, and you feel more confident in your ability to get the mortgage, a seller feels more confident, and you know that you're ready to actually purchase something because you've already been pre-vetted.
Great. And I know that, as I said, there's no one, I mean, what's the quickest that you've been able to pre-approve somebody?
Oh, it can definitely happen the same day because first we have that initial talk, again, 15 minutes to a half hour, and then collecting those documents. As long as a buyer can be quick with collecting those documents, I can review it within a day or so, and we can just pre-approve. I mean, of course, there are times somebody on a Friday wants to view a property on Saturday, so we have to get the pre-approval out right away, and, it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I mean when I say this is not some gigantic thing. It is really the bare minimum of putting some skin in the game, speaking to a lender, getting pre-approved often in a day, and just knowing what you can afford before you actually start seeing properties, which is why we try to work only with people who have spoken to a lender and been pre-approved before we start taking them to different properties. Okay, so you've got an agent. You've been pre-approved. Now it's time for the search to begin in earnest, and finding the right apartment can take months or it could take the first day. It totally depends on what you're looking for and what your timeline is. In any case, it is a collaborative effort because yes, I'm going to send you every unit that comes on the market that fits the neighborhood and description and style we discussed. But let's be honest, like I said, you're going to be spending too much time during the day at your desk checking Screed Easy. And that's fine because I can send you every 2-bedroom in Fort Greene that pops on the market, but you're the one who's going to look at those pictures and say, yes, this is a 2-bed in Fort Greene that I would love to live in, or this is a 2-bed in Fort Greene that just isn't right. So I'll send you listings, you send me listings. It's a very collaborative thing when we search, and we'll start going to open houses or private appointments together to get a feel of what's out there. All right, so we've been looking for weeks, maybe months, because that happens. You don't want to jump in too quick. We've been going to open houses, and some properties you kind of like, and some other properties you kind of don't. And then one day I send you the listing, it's the one, and we schedule a viewing, and the skies part, and the sun shines through, and you hear angels singing, and you just know it's the one we want to make an offer on this house. So here again is where having an agent helps. We can advise you on negotiations. Sometimes we can say, hey, it's been on the market for a while, it's overpriced, let's offer less. See what they say. We can say just how much less to get a response. If we offer too little, maybe they'll be offended. Or maybe the apartment hasn't even hit the market yet. Like I said, we do get properties that are off market just by networking with each other. And we know that when it does hit the market, there's going to be tons of interest and it'll be a feeding frenzy. So we may say to you, if you really love it, give them what they're asking for, or sometimes even more, just to get it off the market and not get it into that feeding frenzy. So that being said, an offer itself is actually really simple. It's just kind of putting it out there, and sometimes you have to wait a day, sometimes even more, to hear back. That's the tricky part. But let's say we do hear back. Our offer's been accepted. Hallelujah, it's a done deal, right? It's not a done deal. Wrong. It's not a done deal at all. Because now comes the most critical time in the purchasing process, the most frenetic, nerve-wracking time, and that's getting to contract. And Jackie, I'm looking at you, because until both parties, the buyer and the seller, have signed a contract, they've agreed on it, they've gone both in, back and forth, both attorneys have gone back and forth, and the buyer and the seller have signed it, anything can happen in that time. It usually takes a week, sometimes 2 weeks, but somebody in those 2 weeks can come in, they can see the place, they can offer more. And even though you had an accepted offer, the seller can accept it and you can't do anything about it. Sometimes they'll come back to you and ask if you want to match it. Sometimes they won't. So until you're in contract, anything could happen, which is why I say it's the most stressful time. But the first thing a seller's agent is going to ask after an offer has been accepted, or before an offer is accepted actually, is who's your client's attorney. It's important to speak to an attorney ahead of time and have one hired. You don't pay them until they start working. But it's important to have one ready to go when you have an accepted offer. It just so happens Jackie's an attorney. So Jackie, can you speak to what a typical contract negotiation looks like and the timeline? And you can specifically talk about due diligence and the different properties that you work with when it comes to that.
Yeah. So the process is very similar for a condo or a co-op. There is, once your offer is accepted, the seller's attorney will draft the contract and they'll send that out within hours of receiving the deal sheet. And that's sort of when the clock starts to tick. While I'm negotiating the contract, I'm also reviewing the due diligence for the building. So that entails board minutes, financials, all of the offering plan documents, and any amendments. And while that's going on at the same time, if the buyer is getting an inspection, they'll do an inspection. If not, if it's not necessary. But there's a lot going on at once. And the problem is that we're at the mercy of these management companies to get us the materials that we want. The realtors are very good at getting the initial documents, like the offering plan and maybe the house rules, but there are minutes that we need to review. So for a while during COVID, they were sending out minutes electronically. They're sort of going back to come in and make an appointment, and they just won't give you an appointment for days. And a questionnaire, which every lawyer has their own questionnaire because it sort of asks specific questions about the building, the unit. And It used to take about 5 days to get the questionnaire back. I think comfortably it's like a 12-day turnaround now. And it's just because of the sheer volume that these management companies are dealing with. I think that in combination where they've got still skeletal staff, they don't have everybody in the office. And it's painful because you will have your deposit ready to go. The contract will be fully negotiated, possibly minutes are read, and you're ready to go. And you're, as a buyer, you're panicking that somebody else is coming in. And we are just relentlessly asking management to complete this questionnaire. And they don't care. They just, when they get to it, they send an automatic email, 5 to 7 business days. And then they actually don't tell you the type of payment that they take. It's just been really painful. I mean, it gets done, but the problem is you get a lot of pressure as a buyer just to sign. But as an attorney, I can't tell you to sign without getting this questionnaire back because it does contain a lot of really important information. What we realize is people don't like to talk at board meetings anymore because everything is memorialized in writing. So, if you're a seller and you have a roach problem or whatnot, you don't want to talk about it at a meeting because somebody looking to buy your apartment is going to go through the board meeting. So that's why the questionnaire management has to answer every question, honestly. So there is a lot of stress between when you think everything's done, when you have an accepted offer, and it really isn't, because nothing is binding until everybody signs and they've received your deposit and they countersigned. So right now it's a super competitive market and it's a little crazy out there, but I'd say typically it's like a 7 to 10 day turnaround between deal sheet and when you can actually celebrate.
And are there roaches on the questionnaire?
Yes. Bed bugs, roaches, everything.
We
Right.
should be saying this out loud, but we were eating dinner last night. I looked behind my wife and there was a mouse caught in a trap. She literally leapt out of her chair, grabbed the baby, and ran to the other side of the kitchen. I think she's watching, so she probably knows.
Right. Yeah, no, there's everything on there, but hopefully these management companies can turn things around a little faster. The last few months have been it's the sheer volume. It's just the number of transactions, so you can't blame them. But
yeah, of course.
Yeah, so
you can blame them.
Yeah, I know. It's a little bit of a stressful process, especially on all ends, right? As the buyer and as the attorney, because you can't tell your client to sign the contract without it, but there is the chance that somebody else can come along. So
right. And I think every broker deals with this more often than we care to, but almost every time you get an accepted offer, not every time, but every broker has dealt with that phone call from the seller's broker who said, actually, we know we had an accepted offer, but someone else came in yesterday and offered much more. Do you want to match it? Do you want to whatever? Or, one time I even got told that it's just too high. They don't even want to bother with a counter. So getting to contract once you have an offer accepted is, the most critical time.
Yeah. And as I'd say, for a house, if you're purchasing a house, it's a shorter process because you don't have to rely on management. It's, the attorney will look into the DOB records and that doesn't take long. And just the inspection, but you can have an inspection done in a few days. But yeah.
Okay. So we're in contract, let's say. Jackie's done her job. It's official as long as your application is accepted and your lender issues a commitment letter. That's your apartment. So now in the case of a condo, the application process, like I said, is pretty simple. There's only one reason they can reject it. It's just a matter of filling out forms. If it's done with a co-op, it can be a lot trickier. Again, this is where having an agent comes in handy because with your help, of course, getting your documents in order, we're the ones who prepare the board application. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you saw what a board application looked like, you'd know that that's actually quite a big thing. We print everything out. We make 7 copies of it. We put divider pages in where divider pages go. Put them in binders and make sure every I is dotted, every line on every ledger matches the line on every other one. It's a big thing. And again, because a co-op board can reject you for any reason they want and not even tell you, you want to make your application as perfect as possible. And that's really where having a broker on your side can help. So let's say your application's approved, your lender is committed, the 2 months have passed, 45 to 60 days has passed, and it's time to close. Closing usually happens at an attorney's office, but I've seen it happen at a brokerage office. It involves a cast of characters. Jackie, again, do you want to just talk very briefly about what kind of people you see around a closing table? Because it's not just the buyer, the seller, and their attorneys. It's a lot more.
Yeah, so in every other state, it's just everything's done through a title company and there's hardly anybody at the table. But in New York, you've got the buyer, the buyer's attorney, the seller's attorney. If it's a condo, you have the bank and the title company. And then if it's a co-op, you have another attorney. You've got the co-op attorney. So it's pretty heavy on the attorneys. And, there's a lot of moving parts. It's about a 2-hour process. But a lot of, in this area and in Brooklyn, a lot of us have been working together for years. So it's always nice if you've got an attorney on the other side and the lender and their attorney who you've worked together and you can make it work. Because one of the second most stressful aspects is actually scheduling the closing, which seems like it should be just so simple, but there are so many parties involved. So what I have been recommending to clients, especially who are selling and even buyers now, is give me power of attorney. You don't have to come to the closing. I'll go over every document with you the day before so you know what I'm signing on your behalf. And this way it eliminates one person that we've got to coordinate everything with. And
Right.
Also just COVID, people are trying to have less people at the closing table, but scheduling the closing is, it can take you 3 days to get everybody to agree on a time.
Yeah.
But, and everything is sort of, you wait for a while to get to the closing table and then it's a little bit of a rush at the end with final numbers, but it always gets done. And,
Right. It's really like the most
Somehow or
boring,
another.
most exciting 2 hours you'll spend.
Exactly.
Yeah. Speaking of boring meetings, I'm trying to keep this to under an hour. We're getting close. So I'm ready to recap. There are really 3 aspects I want to, cover again that you want to consider before you buy a home. You want to know, first, if it makes sense. You want to be able to see if you plan to live there for 5 to 7 years, or at least hold it in the case of a house or a condo for 5 to 7 years. Again, you'll have to likely live there for the majority of that if you're living in a co-op, but you want to be able to hold it or at least live there for 5 to 7 years. You want to know if you can afford it. That includes, not just the down payment, the closing costs, and in the case of a co-op, the post-close liquidity. You also want to consider if it's a good time to buy, which we discussed. It's a very good time to buy right now because money is very cheap. We discussed the difference in properties. We talked about a co-op, how that's a corporation and you're actually buying shares, difference in the application process on one hand, and then there's condos or houses, which are actually real property, real estate with the taxes, just like anything else in any other state. And then finally, we discussed the buying process. First step is to get an agent. You want to get a lender. You want to hire an attorney. And you just want to make sure that you've got the right team in place. So there are 2 ways of really looking at the home buying process. First is that it seems fairly straightforward. But as anyone will tell you, every sale I've been to has what someone referred to as hair on it, which means something will often come up that you never saw coming. That makes it very, very difficult in a very unique way. And that's when we start earning our paychecks and getting around that. Now, whether that's a problem with the apartment, or that's some kind of quirky co-op board process, or an attorney who isn't doing their job, not you, Jackie, of course, but it's never as straightforward as it seems. Now, the other way to look at the home buying process is that it's totally overwhelming and intimidating. As we said, it's often the most large purchase of your life at that time, and it can feel like there's a lot to get done, and you want to make sure everything goes smoothly. So the good news is, and I believe the solution to all of that is having the right team in place working for you, having an agent who's on your side and on the ball, having a lender that's responsive and is an expert in financial aspects of buying, especially here in New York, and having an attorney who is diligent and communicative. And I'm definitely biased, but I think you have all 3 of us here on this conference call, and I hope I've shown that. If you decided that it does make sense to buy, I hope you'll reach out. You'll give me a call or an email. We can take that first step together towards a great investment. Now, there are a couple of questions, not many. First from Louisa, can you buy a condo and rent out right away? Yes, you absolutely can. There's no problem with that at all.
We've done it many times.
Yeah. A lot of people who own condos, especially in very, very large luxury buildings, have no intention of living there. They buy them strictly as investments and start renting them immediately. Paul is asking, and this is a good one for you, Cal. I have my stories, but he asked this question, and I get this often. But are buyers with agents disadvantaged because the seller is paying our fee? Is it make more sense for them to go with somebody who they maybe don't have to pay our fee? I know personally I've dealt with one thing in particular, one instance in particular, where I was selling a townhouse, and someone came in without an agent, wanted it real bad, but didn't know how to negotiate, just didn't know how to negotiate. They kept giving us their upward limit. It wasn't enough. I told them it wasn't enough. They didn't have an agent on their side to kind of push them, or just kind of interpret what I was doing, or to back channel with me, which is something we do very often. We connect with brokers behind the scenes and just kind of say, hey, just tell me the truth. Like, let's just be straight. Let's go grab a drink and just kind of figure this out. And he underbid, and then someone else came in, got an accepted offer. And then this guy who was originally without an agent ended up buying the apartment originally, but for a lot more than he could have gotten it for. Like, he could have gotten it for a lot less had he known somebody, had somebody on their side, on his side, showing him how to negotiate. But it's a good question. It's a question that I've heard often. Do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll talk from personal experience. When my wife and I bought our first home in Brooklyn, we bought a co-op, and I wasn't even in real estate at the time. I was managing a theater company, and we were dealing directly with the seller's agent, who didn't really, I mean, he basically said he was best friends with the co-op board president. So when we got to our interview, when we got to that stage, we said, oh, hey, so we hear you're best friends with John. And the co-op board president looked at me and said, who? I mean, it was just unbelievable, which is actually that was actually a great example of a couple of things I want to talk about. The first is that when you're dealing with an agent and they're working on your interests, they have what's called a fiduciary responsibility to you, which is a big word, but it's basically the same thing that your attorney owes to you. They need to deal with you openly and honestly at a bare minimum. They also have to obey you. They have to give you fair accounting. They have to be responsible to you. They're working completely in your interests. If you don't have that and you're dealing with somebody else, they need to deal with you openly and honestly, but they're not your fiduciary. They're working for the interests of the seller. And what Casey, your example was a perfect example. You were doing your job. You were negotiating on behalf of the seller. That person without an agent was at a serious disadvantage. So that's the first thing. I think in the question in the chat, somebody was saying, is it in the interest of the seller to go with a buyer who's not dealing with an agent because they're paying our fee? Well, I think that when we're dealing, I think that it really goes back to that question of relationship. And it's actually something that Jackie was saying with managing agents. It came to my mind. If you have a good relationship with people in management, you can get a questionnaire turned around in a day or two. If you don't know of anybody in management, it can take 3 weeks to get it done. So a large part of what we do back channeling is we find out who knows who. We try to build relationships. And it's the same thing in a negotiation. For us, we would prefer to do a deal with a buyer's agent if we're on the listing side, who we know them, we know their reputation, we know they're serious, we know they're going to be bringing their A game and bring qualified clients. That's so much more preferable because we're also dealing with people who are informed and know the market, so we're speaking the same language. So I think for all those reasons, I think it's just, I don't really see much of a downside at all, So.
Absolutely.
Cal, Casey, correct me if I'm wrong, but the seller is going to pay this broker fee either way. It's just all going to go to the seller's agent. So it doesn't really benefit the seller because they're paying it regardless. It's just a matter of if it gets split or not. So there's really no downside to the seller because they're paying that either way. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's what they're paying for. What they're really paying for, and what we have in New York City, we're members of an association called REBNY, which is the Real Estate Board of New York. And all brokers who are members of it have what's called a universal co-broke agreement. And what that basically means is we will share the commission 50-50. But what we ask is, if we're on the listing side, we're asking buyers brokers to have qualified clients that they bring. And it's to the absolute benefit of our clients when we're handling the listing. We want the most people coming in who are the most qualified. We want everybody to see it. And by having that much exposure, it will actually bring the property to fair market value. If you're limiting the number of people that are coming in, if you're limiting the number of people coming in as a seller, I would question, why are they doing that? I'm wondering if a listing agent, if you're limiting access to it to only people who are not dealing with brokers or you want to sell directly, I just think you're doing your seller a terrible disservice. So for us, I would much rather do many more transactions with people that I think are just professional and ethical than try to limit it. But that's our philosophy. That's how we do things.
I think that's right on. And I'm not sure, Paul, when you asked this question, if you understood that what Danny pointed out is that, there is a large chunk that the seller's broker just takes. It's not like the seller is getting away with not paying our fee, and that fee is still being paid. It's only been absorbed by one person, and so it really is in your best interest to have someone for the reasons that Cal pointed out and so much more.
Well, and also because you have somebody who's not only advocating, but we're doing the research. And as Casey was really talking to it, I mean, we kind of live and breathe it, and so we can tell you what's happening on the ground. We just negotiated 3 deals, and so we can tell you, what people are negotiating on. Where's the market trending? If things are really heating up, like Jackie said, if it's really competitive, we can position you and have a strategy to get you in. We can talk to people who've done deals in those buildings to see if anything came up in their due diligence to kind of smooth the way to get everybody prepared of going in. And when you're dealing with a broker they're doing all that, they're advocating for you, obviously we want to make a commission, but more importantly, we want to make sure that we put you in the place that you want to be. And so we're fighting for something that you really, really want.
Right.
And you're the captains. You tell us where you want to go, and then we get there,
Yeah. And speaking to living and breathing it, I think one of the best things, I started at Corcoran, moved to Compass, and I've been much happier here. But one of the things we do at Compass is we have what's called Market Mondays, and every Monday morning, because Sundays are generally our busiest day, Monday mornings, we all hop on a Zoom call, literally everyone in New York City, if they can make it, and just discuss the market. What did you see? What have you been hearing? And it turns out to be an incredible advantage to be advised by other agents on what they're seeing. That's just more information for us to be armed with on your side.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't do too bad. 8:40, not bad. Just a little bit over an hour, but I want to thank everyone who showed up. I love doing this stuff. I think it's really fun. I bought a little microphone so that I could. It's just an excuse to buy a gadget.
Awesome, man.
But I want to thank you guys, Danny and Jackie. Thank you so much for your expertise. I hope we get to work together very soon. Cal, and I think, I don't know if Michael's back. Michael's here. I think Michael had to hop off and enjoy Hawaii.
He had to go catch a wave.
They had to go catch a wave, the big kahuna. But again, thank you so much. I will be following up with anyone who registered and signed up. I'm not going to be spamming you. I'm just going to reach out and see if there's anything we can do. Our contact information is up right now if you need it, but I'll be sending you an email as well with the information of everybody on this call. So thanks, everybody. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you have a great Tuesday night.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Good to everybody here. Oh, the comments.
Yeah.
You're welcome, Paul. You're welcome, everybody. Yeah, sometimes you'll have follow-up things that'll hit you, be like, I didn't ask that. Well, maybe that's just me. But yeah, feel free to reach out.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Absolutely.
Thanks, Casey, for putting this all together. You rock.
Thanks, Casey.
My pleasure, guys. My pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right, bye, guys.